History says Xerxes lost the war, that Greece won its freedom, but that's not the whole story. Because when the battles ended, another kind of conquest began, one that used ledgers instead of swords. The daughters of Hellas weren't killed. They were recorded, sorted, and erased. Their names turned into numbers. That's what Xerxes really did, and it was far worse than you think. If you care about real history, stay. When the ledger closes, the bones still speak. The year is 479 BCE. The waters around Salamis are still black with ash. The air carries the sharp stench of burned ships and men. Greece believes it has been saved. Temples will soon be rebuilt. Poets will sing of liberty. But freedom is not what it seems. Not here, on this shore, where victory left something behind. Up in the rocky hills, where the wounded were dragged after battle, the Persians have set up their tents. Not for fighting, for counting. Thousands of women, the survivors of captured cities, are gathered in rows, guarded not by soldiers, but by clerks. The empire's next campaign will not be waged with weapons, but with clay, ink, and silence. The sound that fills the night is not battle. It's the scratching of styluses on wet tablets. A name is spoken, repeated, pressed into clay. A girl from Corinth, a mother from Thebes, a child from Athens, whose age the scribe guesses by her teeth. He does not look at her face. He only checks the box beside condition, acceptable. This is how conquest learns to survive defeat. Xerxes may have lost his fleet, but not his method. Every captured woman is entered into the imperial record. Their bodies mapped, their origins documented, their futures repurposed. To the empire, they are no longer enemies. They are inventory. The Persian war machine has simply changed form, from sword to stylus, from battlefield to bureaucracy. For these women, the war never ended. It just became quieter. Centuries later, archaeologists would unearth tablets from Sardis and Persepolis bearing lines like, "Delivered from Hellas, female, age 17, acceptable. No name, no face, only evidence of how efficiently an empire could turn flesh into statistics." So when you hear that Greece won, remember this. The men returned to their cities, but the daughters of those cities never came home. Their disappearance wasn't an accident of war, it was its design. And that's where the real story begins. In the camps along the coast, where the ledgers grew thicker and the silence deeper. When the ledger closes, the bones still speak. By dawn, the coastline near Salamis had become something unrecognizable. The Persians called it Bariftan, the harvest. To the survivors, it looked like order. Rows of tents, wooden tables, men writing quickly under oil lamps. There were no chains, no whips, no shouting, just a rhythm. The sound of reeds scratching wet clay, the thud of seals pressed down to dry. Every captured woman was processed. The scribes asked no questions. Their job was not to understand, only to classify. Each entry followed the same formula: name, origin, age, condition, usefulness. Then a symbol, a circle. If she could bear children, a line if she could not. Some tablets even noted language ability. The empire was already calculating who could be retrained, who could be taught to serve, who could disappear. What began as war had turned into administration. The same soldiers who had marched with Xerxes across the Hellespont were now acting as clerks, translators, carriers. They dragged women through the sand, not to kill them, but to count them. There were too many, so they divided them into categories: under 12 for domestic service, 12 to 25 for assimilation, over 30 for labor allocation. The system was efficient. Each group was branded with a wax mark on the wrist, temporary but symbolic. Those marked for assimilation were moved into smaller enclosures inland, where they were forced to bathe, change clothing, and repeat Persian phrases. The process wasn't designed to hurt, it was designed to erase. One Greek account, preserved in fragments of Theopompus, described the camps as quiet, too quiet. The women were not beaten. They were spoken to, measured, and then ignored. Silence was the weapon. It told them they no longer mattered enough to be hated. By the third day, ships began arriving. Large merchant vessels, commandeered by Persian officials. They weren't filled with treasure, but with people. The records from Sardis, later excavated, list entire shiploads. From Athens, 240 females, 57 minors, delivered to Sardis for processing. The handwriting is clean, deliberate. The ink has outlasted the names. To the Persians, this was success. To them, the harvest wasn't punishment. It was logistics. A method for rebuilding control after defeat. Instead of conquering new cities, they were harvesting populations, redistributing them into the empire's network of estates, palaces, and administrative households. Some women were shipped east to Susa or Persepolis. Others were sold into noble estates in Lydia or Phrygia. Those considered suitable for royal service were held back for further examination. The process was impersonal, and that's what made it terrifying. Violence can be defied, hatred can be resisted, but the neutrality of the clerk's voice, the slow scratching of stylus on clay, the way the record consumed a human life into a single line of text, that was domination perfected. The surviving fragments of Persian documentation are horrifying in their precision. One tablet catalogues shipment losses. From Corinth, 14 lost to sickness. From Megara, 3 escaped. Loss acceptable. The word acceptable repeats across dozens of records, a term that stripped tragedy of meaning, converting suffering into data. This is how empires endure, not through power, but through paperwork. And yet, behind those clean tablets lay chaos. Greek survivors later described the smell of salt and blood, the cries of mothers as their daughters were dragged toward the ships. Archaeologists excavating near Phaleron Bay discovered bones with deep rope impressions on the wrists, evidence of restraint, not torture. That was the Persian efficiency. Restraint without cruelty, control without spectacle. But the moral design was clear. Killing breeds resistance. Assimilation breeds obedience. Xerxes didn't need Greece to die. He needed it to forget itself. Among the earliest accounts of the harvest is an inscription found centuries later near Sardis, a short carved plea in broken Greek. They took us not for war, but for counting. May someone one day count us back. It's only 7 words long. The stone was reused later as a foundation block in a Persian administrative building. even their grief was recycled. What happened on that coast wasn't chaos, it was policy. The Persian records called it inventory normalization. Greek sources called it the taking of yield. But for the women, for the daughters of Hellas, it was the moment their lives were converted from memory into mathematics. And from that transformation came the machinery that would outlast Xerxes himself. A system where humanity could be erased with perfect handwriting. The question isn't how Greece won, it's how long it took to realize what it had truly lost. When the empire learns to count its captives more carefully than its dead, that's not defeat, that's evolution. Empires don't last because they conquer, they last because they document. By the time the Persian ships reached the ports of Sardis and Ephesus, the harvest from Greece was no longer a military operation. It was an entry in the state archives. The women taken from Salamis, Thebes, and Corinth had become numbers in a legal system. A system that could turn captivity into policy and suffering into profit. In the ruins of Persepolis, archaeologists unearthed tablets written in Elamite and Old Persian, part of what's now known as the Fortification Archive. Among the rations, taxes, and land inventories, a few lines stand out. Received from Hellas, women for royal service, 120. To be assigned by household capacity. Payment recorded. The handwriting is neat. The seals are official. The phrasing is ordinary. That's what makes it monstrous. It's not cruelty in action. It's cruelty normalized by bureaucracy. Each delivery was accompanied by an invoice. Grain for the captive's sustenance, silver for transportation, a small sum for the scribe. The empire reimbursed every expense. Even human misery had a budget line. This is what historians now call administrative slavery, when the cost of oppression is rationalized, audited, and paid from public funds. To the Persian treasury, these women weren't victims. They were investments. Their labor and reproduction were tax assets, entries under the column marked human yield. One tablet lists rations by fertility, assigning higher portions of barley and oil to women deemed capable of bearing children. Another notes value adjustment upon loss, reducing the recorded worth of a dead captive by a fixed percentage, as if she were a damaged shipment. The logic was chillingly consistent. If you could measure pain, you could monetize it. And in doing so, the Persian Empire created something unprecedented. A system that didn't just control territory, but managed identity. The daughters of Hellas no longer existed as individuals. They existed as variables in an equation of empire, labor, lineage, language. From Sardis to Susa, scribes began cross-referencing these entries. A woman from Thebes might appear again months later. Assigned to textile work, conditions stable. A girl from Athens. In language training, progress acceptable. They were tracked like resources, moved between estates as efficiently as cattle. Yet, in this order, a philosophy was forming, one that would shape how empires governed for centuries. Control wasn't about domination anymore. It was about paperwork. When law replaces violence, cruelty becomes invisible. Greek merchants captured later by Persia described an unsettling detail. They saw no slave markets, no auctions, no spectacle. Everything was handled through ledgers, contracts, and seals. A woman could be bought, sold, and transported without a single shout, because her transfer existed only on clay. In the imperial records, the word agiru appears, meaning registered. It's found beside the names of imported captives, livestock, and grain. The same word, the same line. To the empire, there was no moral distinction. Ownership was just data. And once written, data becomes truth. Greek philosophers centuries later would praise the order of law as civilization's triumph over barbarism. They didn't know that the model they admired, the neat categorization, the meticulous record, had already been used to erase their own people. Because what Xerxes built wasn't just a harem system or a logistics network, it was a framework. The blueprint for empire as an economy of bodies. The same system Rome would later perfect. The same logic that would echo in every colonial ledger to come. That human life, once recorded, could be priced, managed, and forgotten. Some fragments from Persepolis even include corrections, crossouts, replacements, adjustments to entries lost due to illness or escape. The handwriting changes, but the indifference doesn't. Each line erases someone. Each correction finalizes a disappearance. If you stand today in the ruins of Persepolis, you can still see the grooves carved by the stylus in those tablets. Shallow, deliberate, almost beautiful. They look harmless, like the lines of a poem. But those lines are the remains of policy, not poetry. The Persians didn't invent cruelty. They invented permanence. Because once pain is written down as procedure, it stops being a crime. It becomes history. And in that moment, Xerxes accomplished what no sword ever could. He made erasure lawful. The question isn't whether the Greeks were enslaved. It's whether their suffering was ever meant to be remembered at all. If pain can be priced, who profits? The ships from Salamis arrived in waves. They carried no gold, no spoils, only women, 40, sometimes 50 to a vessel, bound for the inland holding camps scattered across Asia Minor. The Persian scribes called them centers of preparation. The term was clinical, the purpose was not. The first camp lay outside Sardis, in a valley cut by streams and bordered by tall stone walls. Archaeologists would later find its remains, clay flooring blackened by constant fire, the faint outline of narrow barracks, and hundreds of small terracotta tags engraved with numbers. They weren't identification marks, they were lessons. Each tag bore the same phrase, pressed again and again in Old Persian. To speak the tongue of the king is to live. The Persians understood something deeper than brute conquest. To dominate a people, you had to sever its memory. And memory lived in language. Inside the camp, Greek was forbidden. The guards didn't beat those who spoke it. They simply stopped feeding them. Silence became survival. Young girls learned quickly. Within weeks, they began to repeat Persian words for bread, water, light. Those who spoke fluently were rewarded with extra rations, cleaner water, softer sleeping mats. The language of power became the language of mercy. This was not torture. It was reprogramming. The curriculum of erasure was meticulous. Mornings were for labor, grinding grain, cleaning, weaving. Evenings were for recitation, phrases of loyalty to the king, hymns to Ahura Mazda, etiquette for bowing. Teachers were not soldiers, but eunuchs trained in instruction, chosen precisely because they inspired no personal desire. They were instruments of conformity. A Persian report recovered from the Persepolis archives outlines the system in chilling detail. Each group shall be instructed in the speech and manners of the court. Progress shall be measured by obedience and repetition. Resistance is to be treated with hunger and solitude. Hunger and solitude, the empire's twin tools of obedience. There is a Greek inscription dated a century later that tells the story of a girl named Dione. Captured at 16, she spent 10 years in one of these camps. The inscription, found carved into the base of a broken amphora, reads, "I forgot the word for mother first, then for sky, then for home." By the time she was released, Dione no longer spoke Greek. She spoke the king's tongue, fluently, reverently, perfectly. The purpose of these camps was not to destroy bodies, it was to rewrite them. The Persians believed that true assimilation required obedience of thought, not chains of iron. And so they designed a system where women were made to abandon not only their language, but their sense of time. The days in the camps had no seasons, no festivals, no markers. There was no Athens, no Thebes, no Hellas, only the horizon beyond the walls and the sound of their own rehearsed voices. A Persian overseer's log from 478 BCE records an observation that reads almost like philosophy. The tongue remembers what the body forgets. Break the tongue, and the body will follow. This was the first recorded experiment in cultural conditioning. Centuries before modern empires gave it new names: education, reformation, civilization. What the Persians built was not a prison. It was an assembly line for identity. Every 40 days, inspectors visited to test the women's fluency. Those who still stuttered in Greek or hesitated to bow were sent to the silence quarters. Small huts where no one was allowed to speak for 7 days. Some broke completely. Some never spoke again. Over time, resistance became pointless. The camps produced what the empire desired: docile intermediaries, women who could serve Persian masters, raise mixed children, translate commands. Each one was proof that memory could be replaced with obedience. When the Greek historians later wrote about Persia, they mentioned the wars, the taxes, the kings. They never wrote about these camps. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe by the time they knew, there were no women left who remembered how to tell it. And so, the empire's silence became theirs. By the end of the decade, at least 7 of these facilities operated across Anatolia. Their names are lost, but their method remains. When language becomes law and silence becomes survival, conquest no longer needs armies, it just needs repetition. That is how an empire wins after losing. In every empire, there comes a moment when domination becomes subtle, when the sword is set down and the pen takes its place. For Xerxes, that moment began with a single policy. Every captive woman must be renamed. It was written in one of the administrative edicts recovered from the Persepolis fortification archive. Let those from Hellas be inscribed with names of the king's tongue, that their allegiance may be known and their origin forgotten. The order sounds harmless, bureaucratic even. But the consequences were devastating. Names are memory. Names carry lineage, faith, and the echo of belonging. To erase a name is to unwrite a person. The process began in the camps. Each woman, upon passing her language examination, was summoned before a scribe. A clay tablet waited. On it, 2 columns: name of origin and name of service. The first was spoken aloud, once recorded and crossed out. The second, in Old Persian, was pressed beneath it. That new name was sealed, approved, and entered into the imperial registry. It was efficient, elegant, and final. From that moment, the girl from Athens ceased to exist. The woman called Artemana, devoted to the king, took her place. The identity was rewritten, and with it, the world's memory of her. Every empire has learned to rename, but Persia perfected it. In the records from Susa, there are entire lists of women's names written in pairs. Greek on the left, Persian on the right, like translations of human lives. Among them, Thaleia Parizata, Irene Mithraja, Lysandra Irdana. Beneath each entry, status acceptable. One scholar called it linguistic colonization, but that phrase is too clean. This was not about language. It was about control of meaning itself. Because once you are renamed, you begin to act like the name you've been given. The Persians knew this. They gave women names that carried moral weight. Faithful, pure, obedient, gift of the empire. Identity became an act of obedience. And for those who resisted, their names simply vanished from record, erased mid-line, replaced by blank space. The empire didn't need to punish rebellion. It could delete it. Archaeologists discovered a broken tablet from Sardis bearing a haunting trace. The Greek name Melit half-scratched, half-preserved, followed by an empty field. The clay stops mid-stroke, as if the scribe hesitated, or the woman did. No replacement name was added, just silence. That fragment tells the story more powerfully than any chronicle. In that empty space lies a life untranslatable, a name that refused to die. But the empire was thorough. Even the gods were translated. Captive women were instructed to abandon Greek deities and adopt new ones. Athena became Anahita. Zeus became Ahura Mazda. Prayers were rewritten, hymns rephrased, and so even worship became a tool of assimilation. There's a chilling beauty to how smooth it all looked. The empire didn't shout. It taught, it trained, it smiled, and while it smiled, it erased. One inscription from the Persian capital describes a ceremony of renaming. They are brought before the fire, and the name of the king is spoken. The scribe repeats it. The woman bows. A new name is given, and the old one is cast into the flame. That fire still burns, not in temples, but in history itself. Because after renaming comes self-erasure. Once a person repeats her new name long enough, the old one fades. Ask her who she is, and she will answer the empire's truth. This was the most terrifying victory of all. Not physical conquest, but psychological conversion. A system so effective that its victims carried it forward themselves. In time, these renamed women were transferred from the camps to service houses, estates, or the royal complex itself. Their identities already rewritten, their loyalties remapped. Some would become tutors, attendants, translators. A few, the most beautiful, the most obedient, were selected for the next stage, royal service. It was called the harem system. But what it truly was the empire's next experiment in human design. The question is no longer how the daughters of Hellas were conquered. It's how long they believed their new names were real. When the scribes finished their ledgers, the ships sailed east again, not with soldiers, but with women renamed, retrained, and ready to serve. Their destination, the imperial heartland of Persia, Susa, Persepolis, Ecbatana. In the empire's archives, it was called the Royal Service Network. In later Greek poetry, a single word would survive: harem. But what the Persians built inside those walled palaces was not a collection of lovers. It was a laboratory of loyalty, a system designed to breed governance itself. The royal harem was the administrative spine of Persia's domestic policy. Within its marble courtyards lived hundreds of women from conquered lands: Egypt, Babylon, Lydia, and now Greece. Each was catalogued according to origin, age, and function. Their presence was not a luxury of kingship, it was the machinery of empire. One tablet from the Persepolis fortification archives lists over 1,500 women assigned to the royal household and subject to rotational service. Another specifies allocations of grain, oil, and linen according to childbearing rank. The hierarchy was brutal in its order. At the bottom were attendants, servants, interpreters, musicians. Above them, consorts of noble birth, often daughters of subjugated rulers, given as pledges of peace. At the top were bearers of lineage, women selected to produce heirs and administrators of mixed heritage. Each birth was recorded like an entry in an agricultural log. A newborn was not celebrated, it was certified. Male infants were assigned an identifier, a guardian, and a predicted role: interpreter, clerk, or provincial liaison. The empire was engineering a generation that would bridge languages, loyalties, and bloodlines. A generation that belonged to everyone and to no one. This was the secret strength of Xerxes' empire, not conquest through domination, but continuity through mixture. The children of Greek women and Persian men became tools of stability. They spoke both tongues, knew both customs, and carried divided souls. A fragmentary administrative letter from 477 BCE confirms this chilling intent. Those of mixed descent shall be taught both scripts, that they may serve in distant lands and maintain order without rebellion. It was genetic colonialism, centuries before anyone had the words for it. And yet, behind the walls, the system felt almost serene. The harem was silent, perfumed, controlled. Each courtyard had a fountain, each woman a routine. Lessons in Persian etiquette, accounting, and embroidery filled the days. Every movement was documented, every interaction supervised. The empire didn't need to threaten, it only needed to structure. To outsiders, the harem looked like a paradise of silk and song. To those inside, it was an algorithm made flesh. A Greek captive named Thalia, whose name appears in a Babylonian tablet, was listed as refused assimilation. Her punishment was administrative: reassignment to textile labor, 12 hours daily, minimal rations. 8 months later, a follow-up entry. Status: deceased. Cause: exhaustion. Nothing more. No lament. No space on the clay for grief. But not all stories ended in death. Some women adapted, and that was the empire's true victory. A letter found in the Bactrian desert, written by a woman named Roxane to her sister in Thessaly, reads, "I have learned the words. I bow without being told. The steward calls me wife. I bore him a son. he is beautiful. He has your eyes, but he will never know your name. Roxane was free from pain, but also from self. She was proof that the Empire's experiment worked, because the harem wasn't a prison. It was a mirror, one that reflected the Empire's belief that everything, even love, could be reorganized into policy. Inside these walls, sex became governance. Motherhood became empire. Birth replaced conquest. Every generation of mixed children pushed the memory of Greece further into myth. The women who bore them became living bridges, crossing languages, loyalties, and centuries of silence. And that silence, repeated enough, began to sound like peace. The poets of Athens later mocked Xerxes for his arrogance, his madness, his defeat. But they never knew the truth, that while they carved statues of victory, the empire had already carved its future inside the bodies of their daughters. It wasn't lust, it was legislation, and the law was written in blood. In the Persian Empire, even birth was bureaucratic. The scribes called it continuation through mixture. To them, reproduction wasn't private, it was policy. Within the harem walls, conception itself was scheduled. Every woman's cycle, age, and service record were recorded on small rectangular tablets, administrative fertility charts carved in clay. These were not midwives' tools. They were state documents. Each tablet contained 3 lines: expected cycle interval, days of permissible union, projected delivery and ration adjustment. Human intimacy was reduced to logistics. The empire had realized that it could no longer rely on war to grow. It had to grow from within. Each mixed blood child became a living treaty, a bridge between conquered and conqueror. Through them, Persia would expand silently, generation by generation, bloodline by bloodline. A Persian proverb from that period survives: swords claim lands, sons keep them. That was the logic. From Persepolis to Susa, the policy took form. Every woman of Greek origin who bore a healthy son received an incrakos in rations, grain, oil, cloth, but also a change in status. She became a keeper of lineage. Her child's future role was immediately assigned, some to serve in border provinces, others as scribes in imperial outposts. And so, empire became hereditary. There is a letter preserved in the fortification archive that captures the tone of this machinery with terrifying calm. Report from House of Royal Service. 3 Greek women delivered sons. Record names for purpose of rotation and ensure paternal assignment noted. Condition acceptable. No joy, no mourning, just rotation. Every life existed to fulfill a ratio. The Persian state even standardized childbirth. Specialized midwives, known as keepers of origin, oversaw deliveries. Their job was to document not emotion, but compliance. They verified the father's rank, the child's features, and stamped each clay certificate with the royal seal. These birth slips became official property documents. Each new generation blurred the borders of ethnicity. Within a few decades, the empire was full of bilingual children, half Greek, half Persian, who knew no homeland. They were loyal, efficient, and above all, grateful for existence. The system had produced what Xerxes truly wanted: subjects who would never rebel because they owed their lives to their conquerors. A Greek traveler writing decades later recorded this haunting observation. In the markets of Sardis, one hears the tongue of Hellas but spoken with the accent of Susa. Language, lineage, and loyalty had fused. That was the sound of identity collapsing. And what of the women? They lived in a liminal state, not prisoners, not citizens. They were mothers of empire, praised for obedience, but stripped of belonging. Many internalized their role completely. There are fragments of personal notes written in a hybrid script, half Greek, half Persian, like linguistic ghosts. One line reads, "I am not from there, I am not from here. My son has no homeland, but he will live." It's difficult to tell whether that sentence is resignation or resistance. The Persian government encouraged these mixed houses because they stabilized frontier regions. A child who was both Greek and Persian could govern both peoples. Assimilation became administration. This was conquest without bloodshed. An empire reproduced through affection, routine, and structure. And it worked. Within 50 years, entire provinces, once considered rebellious, were governed by descendants of the very women taken after Salamis. That was the quiet genius and horror of Persia's colonial logic, to make domination self-sustaining. In later centuries, Rome, Byzantium, and even colonial Europe would imitate this model, marrying conquest to bloodline, law to intimacy. But here, in the shadow of Xerxes, it began as a spreadsheet of wombs. Each child born under the program was an imperial equation. Greek mother plus Persian father equals loyal servant of the king. But numbers can't contain grief. In 1958, archaeologists excavated a mass burial near Sardis containing the remains of over 300 women. Many showed signs of repeated childbirth and malnutrition. Some had infants buried beside them, infants only weeks old. Their bones told a truth the ledgers didn't, that the policy of breeding wasn't prosperity, it was depletion. The empire grew, they withered. And when the last woman died, the record still said, condition acceptable. Because when conquest becomes reproduction, even death becomes administrative. The question remains, when blood itself becomes a tool of empire, what part of humanity is left to call our own? Empires record everything except regret. But history has a strange way of keeping its receipts. Sometimes, what survives is not the monument of power, but the whisper it tried to bury. Centuries after Xerxes' campaigns, archaeologists in Western Anatolia unearthed fragments of clay and stone that refused silence, broken tablets, burial inscriptions, and forgotten graffiti, all written in the uneven hands of women who were never meant to be heard. Their words are not long, most are a single line, but in those lines, entire lives return. One shard found near Sardis bears an inscription in mixed Greek and Old Persian. I was Caius, daughter of Nicodemus. They took me in the year of the fire. They gave me a new name. I will not speak it. I served 16 years. This stone will remember for me. Caius. The name itself trembles. Historians believe she was captured during the fall of Corinth, likely absorbed into the royal service. Her stone is small, perhaps a piece of a temple offering. It is not the voice of rebellion, but of documentation, a private act of defiance against official record. Because when your empire writes you out of history, the smallest act of writing yourself back in becomes revolutionary. Another inscription, discovered near the ruins of Ephesus, reads only, I learned the king's words, but I kept one song. The text is shallowly carved, as if done quickly, perhaps secretly. The last word, song, is written in Greek, the rest in Persian, a hybrid syntax historians had never seen before. It suggests something profound, that even under total assimilation, memory adapted, language fused, but resistance survived between the lines. And then there is the letter of Roxaine, the Greek woman turned Persian consort, whose message to her sister was preserved in the dry sands of Bactria. It ends with a sentence that should have ended the myth of Persian mercy forever. I am well. I have learned the prayers. The steward calls me wife. I have given him a son. Please do not look for me. I am not who I was. That line, I am not who I was, is not resignation. It is a warning. The empire had found a way to make the conquered forget willingly. Across Anatolia, these traces form a counter-archive, one built not by kings, but by the disappeared. While the official ledgers counted births and rations, these women carved their memories into whatever would last longer than paper. Amphora bases, fragments of idols, tombstones, even the walls of wells. They wrote like people digging through dirt, trying to breathe. One site near Magnesia revealed a mass grave of women who died around 470 BCE, likely the same labor units mentioned in Persian correspondence. Among them, a single line etched onto a broken vessel. We are not property, we are proof. Proof of what? Perhaps that survival itself is evidence. Perhaps that the human will to speak, even when unheard, is the only force that outlives empire. The Persian system was designed to erase individuality, to replace memory with identity assigned by law. Yet, the very existence of these inscriptions proves the failure of total control. For every tablet stamped, condition acceptable, another hand somewhere scratched back a name. This is what makes these artifacts dangerous. They are not relics, they are testimonies. And testimony is contagious, because once one person remembers, others begin to question what they've forgotten. The women who carved these words could not escape. They could not fight, but they could bear witness. And in doing so, they exposed the empire's greatest weakness, its dependence on silence. One broken pot, one half-written name, one defiant line of text, and suddenly, the empire's illusion of perfection fractures. These are not voices of revolution, they are voices of remembrance. And remembrance over centuries becomes rebellion. The ledgers said, condition acceptable. The bones said, no. Empires can control birth, language, and law, but they cannot control what the dead decide to tell. And so, beneath palaces and archives, under dust and empire, a whisper endures. I was here. It's not loud, it's not complete, but it's enough, because even one voice that remembers is enough to make forgetting impossible. Not all of the daughters of Hellas perished in the empire's machinery. Some learned to move within it, and in doing so became part of it. The Persian system rewarded obedience the way modern empires reward loyalty, with proximity to power. The women who adapted, who spoke Persian fluently, who bore sons without protest, they rose, not as citizens, but as instruments. At the royal court, they were given titles: house mothers, tutors, stewardesses. In the records, their names appear beside distribution lists of silk, incense, and jewelry. their lives were still measured, just in finer detail. One Persian account from the Persepolis archive describes a woman identified as Mithraja of Greek birth. Once a captive, she later administered food rations to foreign-born attendants. She had authority over hundreds. She was, in essence, managing the next generation of captives. Her entries in the archive are brief but revealing. Mithraja, distribution complete. Number of attendants, 128. Deficiencies reported, none. No emotion, no trace of what it cost her to write those words. But in that silence lies a question that echoes through history. When survival requires obedience, does it also require betrayal? The Persian administration was brilliant at transforming victims into collaborators. It gave them new homes, new clothes, small privileges, enough to believe they were free. But their freedom was conditional. They had to perpetuate the system that erased them. Some women, like Mithraja, oversaw the re-education of newcomers. They taught Greek girls the king's language, instructed them in Persian etiquette, and ensured discipline through shame rather than pain. Violence had become unnecessary. The conquered now trained the conquered. It's easy to call this corruption. But it's also survival. What choices did they have? Refuse, and you starve. Comply, and you live. But at the cost of teaching others how to forget. This moral paradox defines every empire, that the oppressed are often made to police their own chains. A letter from a provincial governor in Susa records the practice bluntly. Assign foreign tutors to instruct their own. They obey quicker when commanded by their likeness. It worked. The system became self-sustaining, its cruelty disguised as opportunity. Even the women's children were trained to see their mother's servitude as honor. In one inscription from later generations, a young scribe proudly calls himself son of the king's house, born of the faithful. He never names his mother. He doesn't know that she was Greek. That is how cultural erasure completes its circle, when the erased themselves begin to believe the story written about them. Historians have debated whether these women were victims or accomplices, but the truth is far more uncomfortable. They were both. Victims of violence and participants in its continuation. Archaeologists discovered a small bronze mirror in a burial site near Susa. On the back, scratched faintly in Greek, are 4 words: I taught what broke me. It's impossible to know who wrote it, but it captures the tragedy perfectly. These women became reflections of the system, polishing its surface even as it devoured them. When the empire looked into their eyes, it saw its own perfection staring back. Their complicity gave the illusion of peace. The Persians could claim mercy. We spared them, we taught them, we gave them homes. And in a sense, it was true. They were spared, but only to serve as proof that the system worked. This was the final genius of the empire. It didn't just crush its enemies, it made them believe in its logic. The ledgers list them as assets. The poets forgot them. But the ruins still whisper of the women who survived too well, who learned the price of breathing under empire. Because sometimes survival isn't triumph, it's participation. And when survival demands silence, obedience, and the erasure of others, it stops being life. It becomes administration. Empires don't just make slaves, they make believers. And once you believe in your own captivity, the war is truly over. Empires end slowly, not with fire, but with forgetting. By the time Xerxes' army had long retreated and Greece had declared victory, another procession was quietly unfolding, ships returning westward, carrying women who had once been taken east. They weren't prisoners anymore. They were former captives, freed servants, redeemed persons. The words changed, but the shame didn't. They came ashore not as daughters of Hellas, but as strangers. They spoke with accents shaped by Persian vowels. Their clothes were foreign. Some carried infants with dark eyes. And when they stepped back onto Greek soil, their homeland flinched. There is an inscription from Eritrea, dated around 460 BCE. It records a woman named Harmonia, who returned after 12 years in Persian captivity. She brought with her a child, a boy, perhaps 6 years old. The city council deliberated. The result, carved in blunt legal language: she has been defiled by barbarian touch. Her offspring is not of our blood. She and the boy are to be turned away. The record ends there. We do not know where she went, or if she lived. But that one decree reveals everything. For all its pride in liberty and reason, Greece was not prepared to face what empire had done to its women. They were not victims to be mourned. They were reminders. Living evidence that the line between conqueror and conquered could blur. And societies built on purity do not forgive the impure. To welcome them back would mean admitting that victory had a cost, and that the price was paid in flesh. So they were erased again, not by Persians this time, but by their own people. In Athens, a series of decrees limited citizenship to those of unmixed parentage. Historians rarely connect those laws to the Persian Wars, but the timing is too precise to ignore. Within a decade of the captives' return, the city legislated purity. The trauma of defeat and assimilation had been translated into policy. That's how civilizations bury guilt. They write it into law. A fragment of a play attributed to Euripides but never completed tells of a woman who returns from the house of the barbarians. She pleads to be accepted. The chorus answers, "You were faithful to life, not to us." That line could have been spoken to all of them. For the surviving women, home became another form of exile. Some ended up as temple servants, their bodies consecrated but never redeemed. Others lived on the margins, teaching Persian words to curious children for bread. Archaeological records show small, mixed communities forming near border towns, women and their half-Persian sons living quietly, surviving unseen. Their graves are modest, unmarked stones, a handful of Greek letters scratched onto clay. One of them reads, "I am daughter of no one. I am mother of no one. I am the forgotten. Let this mark that I was." That inscription is perhaps the most honest epitaph of the entire war, because it reveals the final stage of conquest. Not the death of the body, but the death of belonging. The Persian Empire taught domination through structure. Greece perfected it through silence. When you read their histories, you will find no mention of Harmonia or Cleius or Roxaine. Only the names of generals and gods. But in the dirt beneath their temples, the bones still tell another story. Of women who survived captivity, only to be condemned by the world they came back to save. The irony is cruel. They lived through empire and died in democracy. The philosophers would later call freedom the highest virtue. But what is freedom to those who return with chains inside their memories? Perhaps that's why history calls them the silent women, because no one wanted to hear them speak. Their silence wasn't absence, it was rejection, a refusal of a society that could only love them as symbols, never as people. And yet, even that silence speaks louder than the marble heroes carved to celebrate victory. It says, "Freedom without remembrance is just another empire, only cleaner and better dressed." English version, 800 words. When people imagine conquest, they picture swords, ships, and banners. But the real conquest, the one that lasts, happens on parchment. Both Persia and Greece understood this. They just practiced it differently. For Xerxes, empire meant writing people into the system until they forgot where they began. For Greece, victory meant writing those same people out of the system until no one remembered they existed. Two forms of erasure, one bureaucratic, one cultural, both perfect. What Persia mastered through ledgers, Greece perfected through myth. After the wars, Greek philosophers redefined the conflict not as one of nations, but of principles, civilization against barbarism. It was a brilliant lie, because if the Persians were the barbarians, then everything Greece did to survive, silence, exile, rejection, could be framed as purification. The daughters of Hellas weren't victims anymore. They became abstractions, metaphors for moral decay, cautionary tales about mixing blood. The very people erased by empire were now used to define what it meant to be pure. That's how erasure becomes law. The Athenians inscribed new citizenship decrees on marble. Only those born of two Athenian parents could claim civic rights. It was the legalization of forgetting, a way to ensure that no trace of Persia remained, even in blood. The philosopher Isocrates called it the preservation of divine order. But what he called order was simply fear. Fear of contamination, fear of resemblance, fear that empire had already reshaped them from within. That's the hidden irony. The more Greece tried to define itself against Persia, the more Persian it became. Centralized law, state control of birth, public documentation of private life. These weren't Greek inventions. They were Persian imports. Erasure had become reciprocal. Greece and Persia trading each other's ghosts until neither could tell which parts were foreign anymore. The system of forgetting was self-justifying. If no record remained, there was nothing to question. If the women's names were gone, then perhaps they were never there. That's the real danger of history written by victors. It doesn't just omit, it redefines. When we call the Persian Wars the birth of freedom, what we're really describing is the moment when freedom learned how to hide its victims. A Greek historian writing in the 4th century BCE described the silent women as ghosts in the marketplace. He wrote, "They walk among us, but they are not seen. They have returned, but they are still gone." Those two lines contain the essence of every civilization that survives conquest. Survival through selective blindness. Because forgetting isn't a failure of memory, it's a policy. The Persian Empire codified identity. Greece codified purity. And in doing so, both built worlds that could not bear to look at themselves. Centuries later, Rome would do the same. Then Byzantium. Then Europe. Each inheriting the same method. Build greatness on erasure. Call it civilization. That's why empires don't need to burn their enemies' archives. They just need to replace them with prettier lies. What happened to the daughters of Hellas wasn't an anomaly. It was a prototype. The first recorded case of administrative assimilation followed by democratic denial. Persia turned conquest into law. Greece turned shame into philosophy. And the world kept both. We inherited Persia's bureaucracy and Greece's myth of moral clarity. We still measure power by what's remembered, not by what was erased. When you look at history, you're not seeing truth. You're seeing the survivor's version of silence. And if silence is the foundation of civilization, then every monument stands on the bones of those it refuses to name. That is the philosophy of erasure, to destroy by remembering selectively, to honor without acknowledging, to sanctify forgetting until it feels like virtue. The daughters of Hellas were not forgotten by accident. They were forgotten by design. And every society since has followed the same blueprint, believing that if you silence the suffering, you inherit its strength. But the bones don't agree. They speak, softly but persistently, from the dirt beneath temples and courthouses alike. You cannot build purity on absence. You can only build denial. 2,500 years have passed. The temples have fallen. The languages have changed. But the ledgers are still here. They lie in museum drawers, catalogued and numbered, the same way their subjects once were. Each tablet, each inscription, each line of cuneiform is a receipt of suffering disguised as order. You can hold one in your hand, a small clay square, baked hard by time. It fits neatly in your palm, the same hand that could cradle a child. Stamped into it, delivered to Susa, 120 Greek females, ages 14 to 22. Condition acceptable. Those words outlasted every empire that wrote them, because cruelty, when bureaucratized, becomes eternal. We like to think history is progress, that humanity learns, reforms, evolves. But look closer. Every civilization that came after Persia and Greece inherited their tools of forgetting. The names changed: citizenship, purity, order, efficiency. But the logic remained. Control memory, and you control meaning. You can trace that logic through time. In the Roman practice of damnatio memoriae, the erasure of the defeated from stone. In the church's silence over the women burned as heretics. In the colonial archives that listed enslaved people by weight, not name. In modern bureaucracies that turn human pain into data points, logistics, compliance forms. The language changes, the handwriting softens, but the ink still spells obedience. When you walk through the ruins of Sardis or Susa, you don't see ghosts. You see administration. Walls built in perfect symmetry. Corridors that once echoed with footsteps of scribes who believed they were serving civilization. They weren't evil. They were efficient. That's the most terrifying part. That the machinery of cruelty never needs monsters. Only workers doing their jobs. Archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of skeletons of Greek women across Asia Minor. Starved, beaten, pregnant, buried, facing west. Their bones turn toward home, even in death. Their posture is the last act of resistance. It's as if Even without names, their bodies refused the empire's logic. And yet, what did Greece learn from them? It built democracy on the myth of purity. It built philosophy on the silence of women. It taught the world to call victory virtue. We inherited that moral architecture. We still do. Every time we glorify conquest, but ignore who paid for it, we continue Xerxes' system and Athens' silence. Every time a nation writes a clean story of its past, it buries its own daughters under marble again. The empire didn't end. It evolved. It lives in the way we measure success, in how we classify life, in every bureaucratic word that hides a human cost. Condition acceptable. That phrase should haunt us, because it's still with us. In refugee reports, in factory audits, in census forms that reduce people to categories. That is the real legacy of Xerxes and Hellas, the invention of the moral ledger, a world where suffering is documented but never felt. And yet, not all has been lost. Somewhere in the dust of Anatolia, a broken shard bears a single line carved by a forgotten hand. I was here, I remember. That's it. No name, no prayer, just proof of existence. That is enough, because remembrance is the only rebellion that never expires. Every time a historian unearths a tablet, every time a name is spoken aloud, every time we refuse to accept the narrative of condition acceptable, the ledger breaks a little. We cannot rewrite their fate, but we can rewrite our silence. History doesn't belong to kings or victors. It belongs to whoever still listens when the bones speak. Because when the ledgers close and the myths fade and the marble crumbles, the ground still remembers. And if you listen closely, you will hear them whisper through the centuries. We were here, we paid the price, and we still speak. Completed.